Good morning. I'm Debbie Nichols, Director of Grants and Special Projects at Our Lady of Consolation Province at Mount St. Francis in Indiana. All this week, we have been online celebrating Earth Day's 50th anniversary celebration, have done many things online. But today, in continuation of that, we've been focusing on trees all week as a way of mitigating climate change, which is this year's theme for Earth Day. We wanted to interview someone who is a tree expert, and today we're fortunate to have Dr. David Winship Taylor, who's professor of biology and professor of sustainability and regeneration at IUS. Dr. Taylor and the IUS Sustainability Council have partnered with us during the last year with an environmental speaker series, and we're glad to have him today. Welcome, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be working with with Mount St. Francis. It's a place that I've visited for over decades, and I think that they are really working to be a leader in sustainability. I'm a botanist, a PhD botanist, and so trees are quite important to me. And in fact, I teach a course, Summer Flowering Plants, which we learn many of the roughly 100 trees that are found in Indiana.
Wonderful. That's so great. And I know I've seen you on campus with your students. I know they've done some great things here at Mount St. Francis on the campus. One of the first things we all know, I mean, I've been sort of a tree lover since I remember, since being a teenager. I can remember going out in the woods as sort of my way of feeling calm and kind of getting the nature kind of vibes. We all know that trees clean the air, reduce noise pollution, shade and cool homes, reduce stress, and enhance our views. And they also support wildlife, not only when their trees are alive, but even when they die, they become home for a lot of animals when they burrow into the trunks. But we wanted today to talk about climate change in trees and how that's important to the Earth's ecosystem. So, Dr. Taylor, I have 5 questions today. You mentioned a little bit about being a botanist, but what is your experience with trees in particular, and that's professionally and personally?
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, which has a very similar environment to here in southern Indiana. So I grew up used to having trees around me. And as I started growing up, I was interested in the different kinds. I've always been sort of a broader naturalist, so knowing the animals in the trees as well as the trees themselves and seeing that interaction between them. Trees are really vital for most animals, as you've just mentioned, not only as food, but also as a source of places to live, places to provide cooler temperatures and things like that. So as a professional person, I train my students on learning how to survey areas so that we can understand what are the common trees in a natural area, what are the uncommon trees, what trees would be good recommendations for parking lots, for instance, or if people want to reforest an area and they want to make it as naturalistic or not. So you need to know the ratios between, let's say, oaks and hickories, or black gum, which is a smaller one, and then the understory shrubs, which many of them are related to trees, like the viburnums, such as that. So it's been a long relationship. As you see right in the background behind me, this is our farm here, and there's a beautiful oak in the back there that really provides a beautiful view of a landscape, especially when the sun sets, as that's a western view. So they are physically attractive as well. So many different venues on understanding and enjoying trees.
That's nice. That's nice. And I do love the view, though. I do love that. I know that there's been sort of talk back and forth about how much of a benefit that reforestation is as a climate mitigation tool, and that planting trees must be combined with decreasing fossil fuel emissions. What are your thoughts on this, about that balance of the two?
Well, I really like to share some absolutely brand new data based on our campus at IU Southeast. It's a similar size, slightly smaller than the Mount is, but it's going through a similar thing of understanding the ratios of different kinds of environments in there, so that you have grassy areas, you have treed areas, you have roofs, and such as that. So working with my students in my research on sustainability and regeneration, we did work on albedo. So that's basically the reflectiveness. So if you look behind me, you can see how light colored the pond is. A water can reflect up to 100, so albedo. You can see the grass there. Green is not as reflective, and so it has a lower albedo. And then you have the trees themselves. Now, right now, our deciduous trees haven't leafed out, but when they leaf out, if you look at the green part, they're similar to grass, but if you look at the shade underneath them, they are very high albedo that way as the result. So that would be equivalent to 0.7, whereas water, if it's completely reflective, would be 1. On the opposite end is our famous parking lots, which are frequently made of blacktop, and black has very, very low albedo. It sucks up that, and it retains those, the heat that way. So we did an experiment. So we completely mapped the entire campus, assigned them to these major areas. And on the IUS campus, basically, I'm looking at my notes here, 18% was forested and 55% was grass. And I would guess the Mount is probably pretty similar to that. Of course, they have the big lake as well. And what we did is we calculated the albedo for the whole campus, and it was 0.31. We said if we took that grassland and took half of that grassland and planted it at forest, so that we went to 46% forest and only 27% grass, we would change the albedo from 0.31 to 0.43. And that would drop, quite a big change. Yeah. And if you reflect that on ground level temperature, that would drop the average temperature about 8 degrees. So we're talking about a huge change in simply taking a grassy area that might be natural and replacing it with a natural woodland just because of the shade. And that's just shade. That's not including the evaporative cooling aspect of trees. That's simply based on shade alone.
That's something that I did do some reading in preparation for this interview, and I don't remember reading anything about the shade aspect of that you mentioned, just the evaporative part. So that's interesting to know that because of that would, it seems like it would enhance. And how did you spell that, albedo? How did you spell that?
So that's ALBEDO.
Okay.
Okay, and that's it's basically a lot of people in construction are aware of this. Right. So if you take the albedo of concrete, Portland concrete, it's pretty reflective. You think of it as a light surface. So if you took a parking lot and did a concrete parking lot, it would be far cooler than an asphalt parking lot, which has about 0.1 albedo. Okay. And then the other fun thing is parking lots where you put shade trees. So if you put islands and put shade trees, you can substantially reduce that effect of your blacktop because it's shaded part of the time.
Right. That's really interesting. I like that. That's very good. Okay, so on to our next question. I know I have my favorite trees for various reasons, but when we're speaking about which trees are best for the environment for those very reasons that you mentioned, which ones would you suggest and why?
So this is, each tree has a different benefit coming from it. And so the idea that there is the perfect tree or the perfect couple of trees is rather difficult. Again, my class wanted to provide information to the university on shading parking lots. So they did research on what would be the best trees for parking lots here in southern Indiana. And their result was coming down with red maple and black gum. red maple being a full-size tree, so ones along the edges of parking lots where you have a lot of space for roots. If you have islands, generally those larger trees don't do as well, or
Right.
they damage the parking lot. So a smaller tree like black gum does very well as well. And they
Okay.
chose those because there are other trees that are equally good. Things like black honey locusts, things like some of the oaks are considered quite good trees in parking lots, but they wanted to pick trees that were native to our areas, and both red maple and black gum are native. But there's a second benefit. If you know red maple, it's known as one of the colorful trees in the fall, and it has those orange red colors that last for a long time. So you have this visual appeal, so that would gain the benefit as well. Black gum, I believe, is even prettier. It has almost maroon colored leaves during the fall, and they're just striking in color. So what's the benefit? Shade, appearance? What
Right.
exactly are your criteria?
Right. Right. And hopefully, when you, as you mentioned, maybe you can choose a tree that provides multiple benefits, and that would be the thing to strive for, I guess.
Exactly. I think that's a good attitude, but I would also encourage diversity and things that are native here rather than bringing in, let's say,
Right.
ginkgos, which do fine and are very pretty, but they're not native here.
Right. And I know I'm working with the Floyd County Restoration Native Habitat Restoration Team, and I know that the native species are something that we encourage as well. And we're trying to rid some of the areas of invasives, especially around Floyd County where Mount St. Francis is.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so yeah, and I think people are becoming more aware of that, about native species and invasive species. So hopefully here eventually we'll be able to, help eradicate some of those that are invasive and encourage people to keep planting the ones that are native to their areas as well.
I think
Um,
that's a great idea. And that's not just trees, but also native flowers. Roses,
right,
for instance, there are native roses that are very pretty, but people don't necessarily consider them in gardens.
right. Um, our next question is, how can individuals and families make a difference by planting trees in their own yards or communities?
If we look at a Google image of New Albany, Floyd County, and this area, we find actually we don't have a lot of trees in more settled areas, or even in a lot of our suburban areas. And that is something that could be easily changed by homeowners and doesn't cost a lot. There are a number of groups, both at the state level through Purdue Soil and Water, and other, I believe there's a couple of foundations that will provide trees for free. What you really have to do is want to plant them, understand the spacing initially, and make sure you plant them well, because these are usually young trees that will need to be nurtured for a number of years before they are really established and will then become the grand tree that you want them to be. So it's really a desire of landowners to do that. I know that there's some grant money being put together by the Floyd County Foundation encouraging more tree growth. They're trying to do more tree plantings and such like that. And one place that I would encourage planting is along streamways. And that's because those trees can then not only benefit in terms of shade, which we've been talking about, but trees also change water dynamics. And so if you have trees along waterways, instead of having grass right to the edge of them, they will slow down storm events, slow down the accumulation of water, reduce erosion, help our sewage plants function better. So trees have multiple uses, and that's what I would encourage homeowners to do.
Wonderful, that's great. Um, and I want to kind of mention that you kind of made me think of something. We at Mount St. Francis, we are doing a free tree giveaway. 300 trees, native species. In fact, I think I think the three were silver maple, shagbark hickory, and sycamore. We're giving away trees on Saturday, May the 23rd on our campus. And because of the COVID virus, we're going to be doing having a table set out so that people can drive up safely. We want this to be a distance thing, social distancing, and they'll be able to pick up their free trees from their car, and we'll have people there kind of getting those to the car. But we're all going to be practicing social distancing and allowing these at least 300 trees to go out to some new homes around the area. So we're kind of excited about that.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. For those who are interested in planting things closer to the water, the sycamore is a great tree for that. It makes a very beautiful tree, and they like, as I say, their feet wet. They don't mind having roots that are wet. And so you really have a great variety of those three, two that will do very well in dry areas, and then one that particularly likes wet areas, and really are wonderful trees.
Which brings me to this is the fun question, and I have trouble with this myself, just picking one, but what is your favorite tree and why?
So I will have to point to the oak behind me. The reason being is when my wife and I were engaged, we bought this property and then 2 months later got married. And so the white oak behind us is the tree that we got married under. So it's
that's a great story.
It's an individual tree, but I've always liked oaks. And this oak, being one that has been growing out in the open, has a very different structure than if we had put it in a forest, which of course they're forest trees as well. But I have to say that I'm very emotionally attached to the one behind me.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Anything else to add today about climate change and trees in particular, Dr. Taylor?
Well, if we were to fly over our area of Indiana, let's say in the 1400s, so before Europeans came to the New World, I think you would have been stunned how our environment was essentially a tree environment. We think of Indiana as having prairies, and northern India had some areas of prairies, particularly at the wet areas, but we're basically a forested state. And that's true of most of Kentucky to the south of us as well. And as Europeans moved in, they tended to cut down the trees because we were interested in farming. And of course, that farming is important. That supports us as well. But what's happened is we've converted back from farming. We've made a lot of times suburbia that is dominated by grass. And really the idea that you're promoting through Mount St. Francis and others of taking those grassy areas, converting them back into a shaded area with forests really would improve the climate situation here where we live. We're right in the metro area for Louisville, Kentucky. It is considered one of the worst cities in terms of having the heat island effect. And the easiest way to address that is planting trees. This is not a hard thing to do, and is certainly why it's being promoted worldwide as a solution to help mitigate climate change, but certainly won't solve the problem as we continue to have new CO2 coming from fossil fuels.
Yeah, so it sounds like everybody, I mean, no matter how small we start, if everyone would plant a tree or several trees, we could make a huge difference here locally if we were able to get everyone on board.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one way to see that is when we, in about 2 months, when it's a hot summer day, go out to the middle of your grassy area, stand there a moment, walk under the shade of a tree. That's the difference that you're making. And feel that change.
And it is a huge change. I remember. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. This has been amazing. We've got some great information here for everyone. I appreciate you coming today to help us continue our Earth Day celebration this week. Okay?
Thank you very much for having the opportunity, and I will continue to be available if people have questions. And it's really a pleasure to work with Mount St. Francis and continue. And as ideas of planting on there as well, I'd be sure to be willing to volunteer my expertise that way. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care.
Bye.